before I introduce this extraordinary panelist, I have to say that I am really excited about this topic today. I know we have to say that as moderators; it's in our contracts. But the truth is, I really am. As a magazine editor, my challenge is always to try to figure out some new way to frame a discussion that's going to make you think in a different way. And when Cal and Jamie suggested this particular topic, I thought, God, that's brilliant. Because we had Mark Andreessen come into the office a short while ago. And we talked for about an hour. And at the end of it, I asked, well, Mark, what really surprises you? And he said, I never thought that in my lifetime I would see 6 new major car makers. And I thought, absolutely. This was the industry that everyone said was in decay for generations. This was the opposite of a success in the capitalist framework for the last, 3-4 decades. These what had been glorious machines had become 2-ton, inefficient, polluting machines. There were legacy costs. It was difficult to make, and we've seen this unbelievable transformation where we're not just looking at different vehicles and what's powering them and their drivetrains, but what the existential purpose of a car is. We're rethinking the purpose of cars, and that's opening up a whole new bunch of operating systems and value propositions and ways of looking at the world. So I think it's a perfect analogy for the challenges in the pharma medtech world. And with that, I want to introduce this extraordinary panel, all of whom I will point to something they have to do with the car industry. So Mike McNamara is the CEO of Flex. He's been running the company since 2006. Is that right?
Yes.
Wow. Joined in 1994, is the consummate builder, has been building things across the board through this company. It's really an amazing company. And I want to talk a little bit more about it. But one thing that is interesting is the ability to scale up from 20,000 to 200,000 employees in a matter of years. There aren't many companies born before the mid-90s that can actually say that. Joe Jimenez, and then your car relations. So you were a former production foreman for the Ford Motor Company. So on the assembly line, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So that's your core, right?
Yeah.
Joe Jimenez is the CEO and chairman and CEO of Novartis, which you have run for 8 years. And you are coming to the end of that term, figuring out what's next. But I have to say that the FT called Joe and Novartis the digital leaders in big pharma, and I think that's actually true. That in terms of digital transformation, I don't think it's clear that I can't think of another big pharma company that has done more to transform itself in the digital universe. Has weathered extraordinary challenges in the pharma world with drug expiries and others, and done a marvelous job, and has been a good friend for a long time. Greg Moore. Greg Moore runs healthcare for Google's cloud, Google Cloud, and is a physician, a practicing neuroradiologist, a bioinformatics specialist, and a teacher, and a whole bunch of other stuff too, which we're going to get to, I'm excited to say, but somebody who really understands big data and the challenges of big data. And I'm sorry, Joe, your car connection is, of course, you sit on the board of directors for General Motors.
Yes.
So there we've got it at the board level. Greg, your car connection is that you are, in your own words, you're the one who escaped from the auto industry, but you come from a family of dealers, and when you were at Wayne State for 8 years, you worked with the major car makers, right?
Yep, doing functional MRI and
right.
For General Motors for driver distraction.
So you've seen that from the employee management side, the health side, and whatnot. And my final is an actual car guy, Atif Rafiq, who is the chief digital officer at Volvo, and who was snatched away, you might say, from McDonald's, where he transformed that old line company, that old line retailing food giant, into a digital powerhouse. Atif has been at Amazon and Yahoo, and where he ran at Amazon a Kindle group that you basically brought from nothing, from direct sales, and is a real innovative thinker when it comes to rethinking digital operations in legacy companies that you would be surprised are so digital. The interesting thing about, and I'll start with you actually, about Volvo is that you're actually owned by a Chinese company, Geely. I was just in Guangzhou, hosted by the Geely Automotive Group. Really interesting. I actually gave away 5 cars there to a winner of some startup idol contest, and the cars were called Trump Cheese, by the way, just FYI. Trump Cheese.
Don't ask me to translate.
Yeah. No judgment, just saying that's Trump cheese. So anyway, but what's interesting is that Volvo was the first of the major car companies to announce that it was going to go to all electric or non-combustion engine drivetrains by, I think, 2019? Is that what you're saying? That's next year, right? After this one.
Well, it just happened 7 days ago, so yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Next year.
All right. So, so this is one of those big, hairy, audacious goals. Are you ready to do that? Is this actually happening?
Well, I think it's not a question of will happen. It's just a question of when everybody will adopt to these practices. When you're a consumer-led company, you have to face this reality at some point. And so we've made an ambitious commitment. It is a commitment that we think is measured because we have to do it responsibly. And what we've announced is that all of the new cars we're going to make as of 2019 will be at least a hybrid. So they'll have an electrification option, so to speak. And then we'll be very consumer-led around to what degree they will become all electric. And there's a lot of technology to work out around electrification, like ranges. People have anxiety range, and there's a lot of aspects of the supply chain that need to come together. But one thing we know for sure is that this is the direction that things are going to come together around, and that's why we've made that commitment to get on with it.
So Atif, you came to this car company as an outsider, as a digital guy, not necessarily as a car guy. Even though I don't want to, you grew up in New York, right? So you never drove, right?
Well, we don't get licenses until we're 35. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So you're technically not a car guy. Okay, I think we can say that. But from the outside, looking at this industry, I mean, when you think about how much it's changed, I mean, cars now are connected to the Internet of Things. They are basically gobs of sensors on rolling platforms now. The old car guys, like my brother-in-law driving a 67 GTO, can't even look at some of these new technologies. It horrifies them. But it's so transformed. From a pharma perspective, this is a group of pharma, medtech folks, and across the digital health. Is there a lesson that you see that immediately jumps out for this kind of company?
A lesson in terms of from automotive to pharma, or just in general?
I mean, what we've seen in terms of taking that kind of entrenched, broken, forgotten industry where everyone was sort of looking at those.
No, you look at the automotive industry, and I joined the board of General Motors 2 years ago because I believe that industry is going to be radically changed in the next 5 around moving from individually owned cars to autonomous on demand. And it's happening so fast. It's happening faster than even I expected. And one of the lessons that I've taken away in terms of our business in pharmaceuticals from the automotive industry is that when the speed of change starts, it's going to accelerate. So you better be ready. And so one of the things that we're doing at Novartis is we're determining how we can use digital technologies to help us in our 3 core areas: how we innovate, how we sell, and how we operate. And in each of those 3 sectors, we have developed platforms of technologies using advanced analytics, particularly in the area of research and development, that can help us discover and develop faster and better. And so I think the companies that are thinking about what technologies do I need to digitize a big portion of what I do and change the way that I do, I think those are the companies that are going to win.
You know, you mentioned how fast change is coming. Mike, I've heard you say, you know, change is as old as the sun. What's changed now is the speed, the rate, the slope of that change, which is just unprecedented.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our perspective is pretty broad, actually. We have over 12 different industries where we have over $1 billion of revenue. And the revenue we tend to see, because we're more of a technology-oriented company, are actually the newest products in each of those industries. So, for example, we have a multi-billion-dollar business in automotive and a multi-billion-dollar business in medical. And what's interesting is we get to kind of cross-connect and see some of the themes that are going to apply on one industry that's hitting today, and we look at it and we go, man, in about 3 or 4 years, that thing's going to be hitting this other industry. But I think if I was to overall summarize a theme out of it, it would be that technology allows us to more precisely understand the problem we're trying to solve. It allows us to be able to articulate what we're trying to accomplish. You know, Ford said it a long time ago when they said, we're no longer a car company, we're a mobility company. You think about Tesla, they don't call themselves a car company at all. They think about themselves as a technology company. I always often use the example in our business. It's like everybody was all about building a better wash machine. And for years and years and 40 years, there's better power, you know, less water, all these things to make a better wash machine. But then all of a sudden you had to connect it. You had to push a button and it had to order the detergent directly on Amazon and send you a note that your clothes are in the dryer, come get them before they get folded. But if you actually take what technology can do, it's actually not about a connected wash machine or dryer. It's actually about clean clothes. So isn't the problem we're really trying to solve clean clothes? And what technology allows us to do is start thinking about mobility. It starts thinking about health. It starts letting us think about all the problems in the world. It allows us to actually more precisely understand the problem we're trying to solve. And technology continues to develop and grow, and it allows us to be able to, so you can kind of see these themes developing, whether they be in medical or whether it be in automotive or in any other industry. Technology is enabling us to rethink how we go approach these problems, and that's what's creating the speed and the...
Yeah, setting up the question that needs to be solved. Greg, I know you know you actually work for a real car company, Google, which is of course making its own driverless vehicles that are traveling around here. I guess is that actually happening right now? They're right now they're driving around somewhere, right?
I see them all around Mountain View.
It's a little frightening. But in terms of framing this as a question that needs to be solved, as a physician, as a radiologist, I mean, when you came into your world, you set out with a bunch of questions that needed to be answers. Like, what is it that we need to solve here? And how actually, because you work at a place like Google, are able to approach that in a way that probably other companies don't have that freedom.
Sure. It's pretty interesting to come to from medicine into healthcare, and just work with this incredible engineers that are passionate about changing the world and giving them a vision for what we can do in the area of health.
And they're cocky, aren't they? The engineers. They come in and say, "Oh, we can solve this problem that you spent 2 millennia trying to solve. Oh yeah, cancer, we can fix that. With just a little bit of big data and fast
surprisingly, I've seen a great deal of humility.
Oh really? Okay.
Up there as well,
Well,
and an eagerness to learn, and that's been refreshing because this is really a multidisciplinary field. So it's bringing big data into pharma, into auto, into healthcare. So this is really a true collaboration there, and bringing experts together at both sides. One of the things that if you isolate that engineering talent, whether it's from the auto or from pharma or from healthcare, our engineers and any engineers will build bright, shiny objects that don't quite hit the target. So one of my jobs has been able to embed very closely, for instance, in healthcare, engineers side by side with medical professionals, so we actually building things that change workflows, move the needle forward.
So these are changes in work systems and workflows and processes. But Joe, one of the big challenges for people in this room is the problem of the huge number of failures along transitions in clinical trials, for example. Let's take the drug development stage, where it's very difficult to anticipate in phase 1 what's going to actually make it down into the clinic after you spent successively greater sums of money getting it there, and to have these great number of late-stage failures, and we've seen study after study documenting it. How do you begin to change that through digitization, through changes in workflow?
This is a big problem. You know, it costs about $2 billion to discover and develop a drug and bring it all the way through to launch. And that would include the cost of failures along the way. And it takes multiple years. And so what we're doing is we're using digital technologies to help us, number one, reduce the time that it takes to discover and develop the drugs, and then secondly, to improve the likelihood of success. For example, we have a ton of data. We have 10 years worth of pristine clinical trial data on over 1 million patients. And so we're able to take that vast amount of data, and what our analysts could never figure out is now being figured out through artificial intelligence, which is, for this particular illness, this particular disease, which trial sites should we use? Instead of 90 across the world, are there 7 or 8 that will be able to identify the right patients? And we can knock months off of the recruitment times for clinical trials, and this is going to lower the cost of drugs because it will lower the cost of our need to get them to market. So that's one of the ways. Another way is we're increasing the likelihood of success. We're using that data, again, either through artificial intelligence or some kind of advanced analytics to enable us to identify the most likely primary endpoints that will be delivered against when we're developing a new drug. So there are many ways in which we're using machine learning to help us improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of drug development, and I think it's going to create a step change. In fact, what I think you're going to see, once you have an infrastructure like a large pharma company, it's very hard to blow up that infrastructure and start from scratch. But you're already starting to see here in the Valley some companies, early stage companies, that are forming around the drug development process. And it's totally bottom up. It's from scratch. It's like if you didn't have any of the old legacy systems, what would you do?
What would you do in a perfect world?
And it's pretty scary in terms of what they're going to be able to do in terms of time and efficacy.
I want to come back to that key issue. What would you do in a perfect world if we had to redesign this? Because I think that's key. But I want to talk a little bit about data and storage. I mean, you live, Greg, in a world of big data. I mean, 2 trillion terabytes of data for medical X-rays and CTs and whatnot, MRIs being stored. I think I saw you give a talk where you mentioned that it would be 4.5 exabytes, which is like 1,000 to the 6th power or something, of stored data from these images. Trying to find insights from that, and this is going to come back to you, but that's a challenge, right? I mean, how do you take all that data that's just stored there and not have it just be overwhelmed by it? Because I've heard a lot of people tell me, listen, I'm just sick of big data, it's just too much of it.
Right, it's, the size of data is, gets your attention here. One of the biggest challenges that data has typically been siloed. Looking at my field where I came from in medical imaging, data is siloed in individual, we call PACS systems across the world, and not only can it not be easily shared amongst physicians or with researchers trying to get insights from that data, it's really a difficult problem. The public, why I came to Google and why we're interested in data is really this embrace of the public cloud, to be able to bring data, standardize the formats, and allow researchers, physicians, all to begin to gain insight from this data with massive compute and the storage that's available. The opportunities for AI in healthcare and medicine are just amazing. What the potential is for medicine. I'm personally most excited. I'm excited about several. If I had to pick one, it would be in the area of imaging. What we can do with image recognition in medical images. It's, for instance, Google's already been able to look at things like diabetic retinopathy from retinal images, or diagnose breast cancer from digital pathology images. The ability to recognize patterns in images that very quickly and accurately that correspond to a medical diagnosis has the potential to significantly change. And
So
improve
you
the
brought up
quality
a
of
couple
healthcare.
of things that I think are important. One was, getting the insights from that data. And the second, though, is, one of the challenges is that when you start to build in this data capacity and the algorithms and the software into these devices, they suddenly become regulated devices. Which is, of course, a challenge when you're building and working on these systems, because now you've got to deal with integrating different regulatory frameworks. How do you go about that? Because this is your world. I mean, every day.
Yeah, what's interesting is when we started our digital health business, as you know, we look at and see all these different insights across all these different industries, and we said, boy, there's a huge opportunity, particularly in digital health, and particularly in regulated devices that actually are highly regulated and highly compliant. Right. Joe talked about putting billions of dollars into all this research and using AI and data to actually speed the research, to find insights into that research. And I don't know how many PhDs and MDs you had at Novartis, but maybe thousands?
Thousands.
But at the same time, so what you end up with is a drug which is clinically proven to actually solve problems. So then all of a sudden it comes out into the world, and we think about that last mile of really getting insights out of the usage of the drug now. So you've got billions of dollars going into this thing to actually clinically find a solution that actually works. You have doctors that are actually prescribing a solution because they've studied the problem. They have an answer, which is to apply a drug, and yet it goes into the marketplace, and a low percentage of the people actually use the drug as prescribed. They actually don't take the full doses. They don't take them as prescribed. So you have all this money going into the development to end up with a clinically proven result, and yet people don't use it correctly. And one of the things that we said is, we do a lot of the devices, we do a lot of the connectivity in the devices. If we could develop an IoT platform that actually is open and utilizes the cloud to be able to capture the data and utilizes tools that we find with the cloud manufacturers, that if you can get more compliance, you'd get a better outcome for the people, and you'd get a higher profitability actually for the users. So the med tech companies and the pharmaceutical companies that actually are prescribing, that actually have the drugs, would get full dosages and full use out of the people. The doctors would actually get insights out of how they're actually being applied and used. And at the same time, so you end up, and at the same time, the people would get the benefit of actually applying the solution correctly. So that's what we've done with our IoT system, and that's what we've done with our business. We provide an open system, and it doesn't matter which pharmaceutical company or which medtech devices will enable the system that allows these devices to connect in. So, and this is something that costs tens of millions of dollars instead of billions. But that last mile and getting the closure on actually using it is where another enormous opportunity has come from, and that is going to drive all kinds of new insights.
Atif, the last mile is an area that you've spent a lot of time dealing with and thinking about from a digital perspective. Particularly, let me go back to your last job at McDonald's.
Yeah, let's talk about burgers.
Yeah, talk about burgers, because it really is about connecting with the end user, in this case, the customer. And so how did you find that when you started to connect with the user, what did you learn from that process?
Well, okay, so let me give you an example. When I arrived at McDonald's, you'd think McDonald's has data and customer information at scale. There's 70 million customers a day, I want to emphasize that, per day, who walk into a McDonald's across the world. So when I arrived, I said, well, how many customer records do you have? Like 100 million, 200 million, it's got to be a ton. And the answer was really low, like single-digit millions, which was kind of a shame. So in other words, when the customer walked into the McDonald's, it was as if they were anonymous. They had just dropped out of Mars into a McDonald's, and that's usually not the typical customer. There's some behavior there which, if you understood it, you could actually save the customer time, because a lot of behavior repeats itself. And so I think you have to work backwards from the customer to say, what is the customer experience, the target customer experience, and what would that break down to? the thing I learned is that while you can digitize the customer experience and come up with new names for things, Starbucks calls it, order ahead. We call it mobile check-in. We have an experience now called table service where you could punch it in. McDonald's, you could punch it in on a kiosk, take a seat, and they bring the food out to you. It never existed before. All this new stuff. But at the end of the day, it really boiled down to one thing, and that's convenience. And McDonald's had always stood for that for 60 years. So really, when you think about digitization, I believe it will come back to the inherent roots of the company, the core attributes of that, what that company is all about. For McDonald's, they happen to be taste, value, and convenience. That's it. And it's really about thinking about the modern layers around that.
So I want to get back to this issue about the automotive world. And, one of the things that's come from this is this need to partner outside of your comfort zone. So the legacy car companies, we did a cover story called, Silicon Valley Goes to Detroit. And it was about a culture clash as much as anything else. GM goes and buys the Kyle Voigt and Cruise Automation. And it's interesting to see the old car guys trying to work with the young Silicon Valley guys, but that's coming to pharma, isn't it? I mean, Greg, you're part of this now. Why don't you talk a little bit about that culture difference, because it is about culture, and I'm going to ask you to grab on that too.
Sure. I think I'll even bring it back to some of the challenges that we face. I think understanding that bringing that back to regulatory, we bring this into developers and culture. So I think understanding the regulatory environment can be one of the biggest challenges for developers who aren't familiar with the domain or ecosystem. Right. So we have these fantastic developers, but they've never worked in auto, or they've never worked in healthcare or pharma, and don't have an understanding of the regulatory process. Deep understanding of the regulatory and compliance processes for these, is that something that you sprinkle on top after you've developed a solution? And as my colleagues here know, you develop that, you start with that in the design process from first principles and bring that along. We've made very significant investments in getting all of our public cloud platforms compliant for healthcare, including our applications from that, so developers can then build on top of those in a compliant fashion, so their solutions end up with compliance there. So that's the culture, this is, as I said before, a really true collaboration of our developers and the developer ecosystem partnering with domain experts in the field.
And Joe, you've talked about this. You've talked about the fact that they're like a startup mentality where they've got agility, they've got a lot of the energy and the fresh ideas, but they don't necessarily understand the science or the medicine in the same way. They don't have the deep understanding of the regulatory regimes that are involved.
Right. Well, I think this is where the collaborations can be very powerful, right? If you've got a pharma company that understands the regulatory issues, and then you've got a startup or somebody with the technology that you need, putting those two things together, but doing it in a very careful way, can lead to positive outcomes. I mean, at our core, we discover and develop new and innovative medicines that deliver positive outcomes. But if you look at what prevents an outcome, as Mike said, much of it is compliance, that the patient doesn't take their drug. And so how can you get a positive outcome when they don't take their drug every day? And so we're looking at ways to bring technologies around remote patient monitoring so that we can help remind those patients that take a particular, let's say, antihypertensive or some other kind of a drug, that you need to be monitored in a way that can help remind you to take your drug. That doesn't mean we have to own the technology. We can partner with companies that have that technology. They might not understand the regulatory issues, but we understand the regulatory issues, and between the two of us, we can deliver a better outcome.
I've had,
Please,
being an almost car guy, but not quite a car guy, sure. I was also on the board of Delphi.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah,
interesting along the whole lines of the convergence of Silicon Valley with Delphi, because when I first started going to Detroit, my title on my presentations was actually bringing Silicon Valley to Detroit.
Oh, okay.
So, but what's interesting is I was in a board meeting in, I think it was 2010, it might have been 2011, and I actually asked them if they had been to Google to learn what they were doing. Yeah. And Delphi now has evolved into Atif, just for many of you know, who's one of the most advanced autonomous guys out there and is running autonomous vehicles. So now 2010, which is not so long ago, I'm in the board meeting and I said, have you talked to Google? They're driving around Silicon Valley in self-driving cars. And it's like, what for? No, we've never talked to them. They've never talked to them. They never talked to them. This is the leading electronics manufacturer of electronics in cars. And they had never talked to them and didn't see the need. And I said, you are not going to get to the next generation with all your engineers in Kokomo, Indiana. It is just not going to happen. Go drop 50, I told them to drop 50 engineers into Silicon Valley, drop 50 engineers into maybe Tel Aviv or Haifa, and just experience the technology and the innovation that's coming out. And it was pretty much, they thought I was a little crazy because everybody else on the board as well was old school, East Coast kind of guys. I was the only guy from the West Coast, and I was in there going, the world's going to change. Digitization and technology enable us to solve problems in a different way. Now you fast forward literally only 5 years, and every car company has rushed to Silicon Valley. They've made investments. They've bought cruise automation. Every car company has done that. The Chinese companies have acquired Western car manufacturers. So this rush towards technology, towards insights, towards data, towards software is not just in the automotive industry. It is for sure going to apply across into the medical industry. The digital journey is never going to end. You know, even think about the autonomous vehicle or the automobile industry. Back when I was talking to them about going to see Google, they were talking about safety and security. Then you fast forward a little while after that, it was all about infotainment, about making sure Google didn't control the cockpit. You know, Ford and GM wanted to control the cockpit. And then you fast forward a little bit more and you start moving into connectivity and automation and connectivity into 5G and everything has to now be a system. It's no longer a product. The car itself is no longer a product. It's about a system. So technology requires us to move into a system and it requires other partnerships as a result of moving into a system-level solution instead of just building a better product. So this is going to happen in
I think you're
the medical industry too.
And we have an example of a partnership right here between our companies where, and I'll give you the learning from it, where Volvo has decided that we're going to take a native version of Android and embed it in the car. So think about this. For so many years, when you went to a car dealership, they tried to upsell you on a navigation system that cost a ton of money, created a lot of margin for the company, but that you never really used. The statistic is actually that you use it 5% of the time. And why is that? Because when you step into a car cabin, you actually go down in functionality because your phone is more updated than that system in the car. That didn't make any sense whatsoever. But of course, incumbents just look around at each other as the basis of competition as opposed to what the consumer is experiencing in the rest of their digital life. So we're one of the first companies to work with Google and say we're going to put a native version of Android embedded there. And what that means is that the moment it updates on the phone, it's also updating this particular device called a car. And that makes more sense. Now you could look at that and say, well, we're giving up the cockpit. But I think that's just a lack of imagination because there's a lot more you can actually invent. So the use case I have in mind is that, it's Sunday evening, you have to get to the JP Morgan conference in the morning, it's a long drive, your fuel level is low, you're probably going to be pretty stressed about fueling up. So we'll dispatch somebody Sunday evening to take that headache and stress out of the equation. And that we can do because we know your calendar and we also have access to the car data, so on and so forth. That's not something you can get, that's an area where you can actually differentiate is by creating up these new use cases. And I think we're just going to have to think a little bit bigger and the customer is going to win. And I think we can all win within that.
But it does bring up a question about thinking about, challenging our long-held assumptions about the business model and about what's appropriate in this particular industry. And I know that, even Joe, recently, just in terms of pricing, you tried something radically new, a different kind of value-based pricing with your latest CAR-T drug. What was the response to that when you said, listen, we want to set up, here's the price, but you're going to pay if it works?
Yeah, the response was very positive. So I was very nervous. We were about to come to market with the first cell therapy for acute lymphoblastic leukemia that had unbelievable remission rates in a disease that was deadly. And yet it was a very expensive therapy to deliver. It wasn't a drug, it was a physical therapy where we take the blood out of a patient and we genetically modify the T cells to identify the cancer and then we reinfuse it back into the patient and it obliterates the cancer. But it was a very expensive process, and I was thinking about all the tweets that were going on around bad pharma companies that were pricing too high, and this thing was going to be a multi-$100,000 therapy. So we priced it where we felt it was going to deliver a value to society, but also a value to patients, so we weren't keeping all of the value for ourselves. And we also said that as that price, you only pay that price if that patient reaches complete remission after 30 days. And if it doesn't, then we'll eat the cost of it. And so that was an innovative pricing model to bring a new therapy to many, many cancer patients who didn't have access to the therapy. And it was putting our money where our mouth is, basically saying that we're going to essentially guarantee the outcome or you're not going to pay.
And you know, some of the challenges in terms of the reframings of the industry are going to be pretty radical. I mean, in the case of the car industry, for example, you know, this idea that, hey, you know, maybe you don't need to own a car. Maybe we'll just have a car come pick you up and you'll share a car, or we'll just have autonomous vehicles ferrying people around in robo-taxis. You know, the car industry, the legacy car industry is saying, hey, we sell $570 billion worth of vehicles each year. That's a lot to suddenly say, oh, maybe we should rethink this to an industry that doesn't sell cars. But for the drug industry, there may be some of these radical kinds of approaches. And you know, Joe, because you're leaving soon and you're on the hot seat. So do you imagine a world when, you know, the pharma companies might say, you know, well, we're not going to, you know, we may partner and, you know, sell therapies in a different way, or
no, I think what's going to happen is 20 years from now, pharma companies are not going to be paid based on the number of pills that they sell. They're going to be paid based on the outcome. So they're going to get paid based on keeping patients alive. If you have cancer, how many months is our therapy keeping you alive? And that's how we're going to be compensated. So I think there's going to be complete chaos in terms of the business model within pharmaceuticals, as health systems around the world are struggling to try to keep up. And so a pay for outcome model is where it's headed. And that's going to benefit the companies that are really innovative, and it's going to crush the companies that are relying on, you know, incremental innovation today.
Yeah, and so I think that whole movement is changing as we're changing away from fee for service to a different kind of model. Atif, I see you shaking your head. Do you think that's actually the outcomes-based model is where we're headed?
I think we're just at the start of different ways to reach the consumer, in our case. So I think a lot about things like Airbnbs and WeWorks and new property development and smart cities, and how we can pair transportation with residences, for example. There's no reason why when you show up at the Airbnb, you don't just get the accommodation, you should also get the ride. That would be a pretty good simplification for people who need accommodation. We can, for the property owner, we could actually allow them to actually own the vehicle or subscribe to it, which is something that we do. And so all those things are going to be sort of a little bit of spaghetti, a lot of different ways to make people happy. You can't really anticipate exactly how it's going to play out, but you have to be ready for it, to Joe's earlier point. So the kinds of things we're doing, for example, in the car that's released, our small SUV here in January, it comes with P2P sharing. So you can open up your phone and you can allow a trusted friend or family member to actually use it during a scheduled period. So we have the capability. You don't have to be there to let someone else use your car. Exactly how will it play out? Is there a monetary aspect? Is that just like being a good friend thing? Who knows? We'll see how that goes, but we will be ready to respond.
One of the ways in which we're going to see more innovation is on the manufacturing side, whether that's on the drugs or the devices or integrated things. You know, Mike, as you've moved your company from a simple contracted manufacturer to what you call sketch to scale. I'm sorry, it's hard to say that. Sketch to scale. And the idea is really that you're there on the napkin, drawing stuff out, figuring out things based on the insights that you have. What I found amazing is, though, that if you think about the number of patents that Flex has this year, something like 240 versus twice what you had the previous year. That's a lot when you think about that. What are you learning about, in general, not at a specific grain of salt way, but general about how to improve manufacturing processes at this, because that's ultimately going to reduce the costs.
Yeah, so let me just kind of frame the whole sketch to scale theme. If you accept that the world's going to move to digitization, and it's going to continue to have increasingly accelerated moves towards that digitization, you need all these connected devices, and the connected devices are now going to be connected. They'll be capturing data. The data is going to be going into cloud more likely than anything else, because the amount of new data that's being captured and new business models will evolve. So companies have to evolve their business model from being just a pure product into being a system, to be an entire system. Joe can't execute his model of pay for performance unless he knows there's actually compliance when he applies the drug, that people are actually taking it. So what we said was, let's reconfigure our company. And let's accept the fact that everything's connected. Everything needs technology. And we'll develop, you'd mentioned patents, we develop underlying core component technologies that allow things to be connected. So when a pill dispensing device or a syringe or whatever it needs to be connected, we do the underlying core technologies to power it, to do the wireless communications. And in fact, in our digital health group, we actually created the IoT platform to actually be able to send the data back to the manufacturer so they can begin on this digital journey. So what we've done is we've invested in underlying core technologies. The products themselves, we don't have patents around. We just want to make sure that when the pill dispensing guy comes and says, I need to now connect, that we can connect him faster in a more competitive world and get him connected into that marketplace and get him the data and the insights that he needs to improve his business model and drive his revenue and drive his performance for his consumers. So that's what we spend our time doing. And we think there's a huge opportunity. There's only a few initiatives we have at Flex where we're specifically developing entirely new business models to enable it. And part of the reason is because we saw many different bespoke solutions for so many different manufacturers that we said, boy, if there was a platform from a company that has, the credibility and the balance sheet like a Flex, that can actually enable this connectivity into the cloud so that they can get the insights and data, would be a huge value added, both for the company itself to drive revenue and compliance and get data and insights out of the field, but also for the patients themselves to actually have a better outcome. So we kind of viewed it as being just a wonderful opportunity for us to participate.
And this is, the big issue, supply chain. I mean, I know that the pharma folks have been criticized for pricing, and this isn't a conversation about that. But one of the things that you've said, Joe, is that some of that a big chunk is lost in the supply chain. 3 or 4 cents of every dollar, of every 10 cents, whatever it is, 30, 40% is lost in the supply chain inefficiencies or someone's grabbing it. Talk a little bit about what you've figured out on that front and how this group can improve on that.
Well, what we figured out is that if you look at $1 of pharmaceutical sales, the pharmaceutical company gets 60% of the revenue of that sale. 40% goes to the supply chain, so the PBM, the pharmacy benefit manager, or the insurance company, or the retailer. And when you think about who's taking the risk, we don't think that's exactly fair in terms of that split, because we're taking the huge risk financial upfront to get that drug to market, and there's yet a very large percentage. So it's a very inefficient supply chain currently in pharmaceuticals, and that's why you've got a lot of companies out here that are looking at potentially disrupting that supply chain. Why does it have to go from the manufacturer's warehouse to a wholesaler, then to the retailer? What about a direct-to-consumer model that could wipe out the costs in that internal system, and that would be more efficient? It would be better for the patients. Drug pricing went up 1% last year, but the actual thing that the consumer saw was a very large increase in percent because co-pays are going up. So the whole system value, the pharmaceutical pricing is not going up. But the actual payment of a patient is because of that inefficiency.
So you see digital disruption happening in this payment model. If we had to prioritize and we said, okay, on the manufacturing side, on the payment model, on the drug discovery side, I mean, is there one where, how would you say in terms of where the progress has been?
Well, right now the progress has been on the research and the development side the most. So when you look at big data and our ability to use advanced analytics to discover new drugs, we're already doing it. It's paying off. We're reducing the cost. We're reducing the amount of time. The commercial side of the business, it hasn't even touched. And it partially hasn't touched because it's a highly regulated industry. Patient privacy data is very important. And so you've got a ton of attorneys in these pharma companies that say you can't do certain things. So if somebody can crack the commercial side and the supply chain side, there is a ton of value to be created in this industry.
Greg, blue sky. You're in the blue sky company. You're in the moonshot company, Google, and you know you're all sitting in those little sleeping pods, thinking about ways to upset the apple cart in some way. So remake this industry for me.
Yeah, what I would say is that we at Google and Google Cloud would really want our partners, our customers, to be laser focused on their core competencies. So whether that's precision medicine, drug discovery, omics, technology development, IoT of things, and then partner with someone with deep domain expertise in that area to do advanced analytics, machine learning, to give you regulatory compliance in that area on your technology base. So you don't have to spin up a department, IT department, to do all of these things. So partner, then work very closely with a key core technology partner, and then let the individual businesses, whether that's auto or pharma or technology, actually concentrate on their core competencies, so they don't have to build those, become competent in a whole other field that's so rapidly changing to do that.
Atif, you once created a virtual reality system so that somebody could walk into a Happy Meal.
Yes, that was really cool.
Yeah. I would like to,
And
I'd like
adults
to do
started acting like children. That was the main
All
lesson.
right, so I want you to put on your VR glasses here and reinvent this industry. Where do you start?
Which one you want to start
The
with?
healthcare industry, med tech, pharma. What?
All right, well,
from an
that's
outside perspective.
I would say that, well, let me maybe focus on the intersection because
Sure.
I might have some perspective on that. I mean, cars do try and do some of that today. We look at behavior and try and detect if you're drowsy or intoxicated, maybe give you a nudge to fix that problem. But of course, with autonomous drive, you have a fantastic situation where this serene, beautiful environment of a luxury vehicle is your own personal cabin. And then you begin to say, how do you occupy that time? How do you make good use of people's time? And of course, you can do a bunch of productivity things, but maybe you don't want to be on a conference call your whole life because that's what the rest of your time is being spent on. So what about health? What about taking care of yourself? What about doing your daily readings and really checking in? There's a lot of advancements in science that are beyond my capacity to explain. But this beautiful, serene environment, even if it's a little amount of time, but it's very meaningful time, what can we do there to really tap in and drive the personal health objectives of each human being? I mean, I think that's a vast opportunity. It's one reason why I'm here, is out of curiosity to figure out what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, you mentioned the 12 different sectors that you have with more than $1 billion in sales. I mean, this is across the board. Where's the leadership? What area do you see the most intuitive grasping of digital transformation?
Well, probably right now it's, it's hard to say. We're in so many different industries with so many different rates, but I'd almost say automotive is going the fastest because I think automotive has multiple simultaneous transitions. It's not just that they have to transition into digital, they have to, it's all about mobility, it's about electrification, and it's about connectivity. So those are actually three different things. You can solve a mobility problem. You don't need an electric car to have Uber.
Right.
So they have like a triple threat. And that creates the amount of speed that we're seeing in that industry, which typically has been a very, very sleepy industry. You have other industries who have already been rapidly adopting it very quickly for a long period of time. A lot of the consumer industries have been adopting this for many, many years. And I think that's something that's happening. I think medical is a little bit slower. But I think it's a huge opportunity as a result, whether it's optimizing the distribution channels and how the product actually gets to market. But when you're spending 16% or whatever it is today of the GDP on medical, at least in the United States, and the costs keep going up 6 to 10%, but not necessarily the value is going up 6 to 10% a year, there's a disruption waiting to happen. And the disruption is going to occur on the back of digitization and on technology. And so it's one of the reasons we're here today, quite frankly, is to actually help enable it. And what we do is we don't have these end products. We don't do what Novartis does, never will. We don't do our own products for syringes and medical devices and those kind of things. We just enable companies get into that digital world faster. We can help design it. We can help participate in making it collect into the cloud through digitization, through our SaaS-based IoT platform that we have in digital health. It's coming, and it's going to come at an increasingly fast rate because the digitization of the world and technology is driven all across the world. Particularly as you go into China, this stuff is going to come real fast. In fact, I think more of the disruption in automotive is going to come out of China than it's going to come out of anywhere else. And but everything's at a different rate. But the one thing I say for sure is it's coming. You got to get on the digitization journey. You got to get the insights. You got to get the data. You have to reinvent your business model. It is not going to happen unless you start capturing data at the source.
So this healthcare industry broadly, Rit, is not just heavily dependent on scientific uncertainties, there's problems, conundrums that have yet to be solved in biology, but also heavily regulated. And Joe, I hate to come to you, but as a guy who's an opportunity, you're leaving, you can walk out the door, you can kick that door on your way out. Is there, in terms of the regulatory frameworks, how do we disrupt that?
Well, look, I think the regulatory framework is actually going to start to lead pharma. I mean, if you look at what Scott Gottlieb is doing, the FDA commissioner, he's changing the FDA. They just formed a digital group that is looking at ways to use digital technologies to speed drug discovery and development, because their objective is to get more drugs onto market, lower cost drugs, more competition. So I think they're actually going to help us. But it has been a hindrance. It's been an excuse. It's one of the reasons why pharma and medical is behind everybody else in terms of digital transformation, because of the numbers of attorneys that are saying you can't do this. This is a highly regulated industry. But I think that's starting to break down now.
Well, I think, I absolutely give a huge kudos to Scott. Scott's done a phenomenal job leading, I think, in this environment. But one of the challenges is on a regulatory standpoint. I mean, for testing liver tox at the FDA, they're still using technology that's 7 decades old.
Yes.
There are things like that. There's still very, as quickly as they come, it's not a question of the sort of going from, from NDA or BLA to approval that's taking so long. It's the rest of the requirements for clinical trials, for example, that builds in so much cost. So how do we reinvent the clinical trials process through digitization, through artificial intelligence, through in machine learning, through other aspects?
You could not change the regulatory framework at all, and you could radically transform the drug development process from today very asset intensive to an asset light environment. And I think you're starting to see it now. And even so Scott at the FDA has a big job to do to change his own organization. You can talk about digitization and how great it is, but if your people 7 layers down are still using old technology, then it's not going to help anybody. So that organization does have to transform. But I would tell you that if you can use today advanced analytics, you can radically reduce the cost and improve the effectiveness of a clinical trial, even within today's regulatory framework.
Greg, you mentioned the diabetic retinopathy study that Google led with this, incredible machine learning, being able to analyze tons and tons of images at a rate at a success rate or an accuracy rate better than or akin to the experts, the radiologists, of which you are one. Do we see more and more of this? You know, I mean, tell me where some of the new applications might be, where you envision between AI and / machine learning.
Yeah, certainly I mentioned that image recognition and medical imaging was one I was really excited about. If I had to come to a second one, it would certainly be in the area of precision medicine. What we're, you know, inherently a big data problem, a big data opportunity, and we've just begun at Google, the Google Brain team, recently released deep variant, using deep learning to actually call genomic variants. And again, and we did that in a way that we're committed to open, so we open sourced that at Google for the community, and both from a cloud point of view, did both a speed optimized version and also a monetary optimized version to do that. Again, so that researchers, those in drug discovery or precision medicine can actually concentrate on their business there, and then we can provide them those tools. So I think that commitment to open in whatever we do, I think going to regulatory, I think it's really important that not only we at Google, but others commit to actually showing, you know, opening up that black box that is AI and machine learning, and actually showing how we do those things. And you know, I'm pleased that you know, we consistently put those out in publications to do that. So really excited. You know, so precision medicine would be number 2, but there are so many opportunities in healthcare that go from just from language and speech to vision to video, all that are APIs that are established that will certainly be adapted by us and others for medicine.
Mike, nobody deals with more machines than you. Probably I can't think of anybody. So machine learning in your world, you know, when are these things going to start talking to each other and taking over the world? I know they're already talking to each other.
Yeah, it's not like it's an event. You know, it's just like a continuous process. Every year there's more and more machines, more and more connectivity, more and more data. As you put data into the cloud, the tools, you know, that Greg and Google are developing get better and better and better. So I don't see it as, you know, that there's a switch that, okay, it's on now, but it's a continuous thing. People talk about automation as a good example. I mean, automation, you can be in the car industry, the automation's been coming hot and heavy for a long time. It's just getting more and more. And as the tools get developed, as data gets easier and easier to analyze, as the cost of analyzing data keeps going down, we're going to use it more. And as we use it more, we're going to be able to apply it. And then you have new technologies, even into optics and other places, where you can now apply AR and interface AR and really get visual data all the way into the digitization process. And it creates another dimension. So it's just going to keep coming. And it's just, I don't know that it ends. It just keeps coming.
Well, I think we must be running out of time here. Are we good? So I want to ask with one last, which is really about the consumer. So I would love each of you to sort of think a little bit about, and maybe just share a few thoughts on how the consumer, the patient, the end user is really driving all this transformation. Atif, I know this is something you think about day and night in your world. Just what can we expect, at least in the sort of broader health space, about how the consumer is going to drive change?
In health in particular, you're asking the guy from Volvo.
Yeah.
Well, you got McDonald's experience too.
Yes, exactly.
Well, there you go.
Well, I think I was really taken to
Or
this.
in car. Go with your expertise, yeah. That's
Well, in the car industry, I think it's really, the definition of the product is changing entirely. So people look less at the horsepower and the spec of the chassis and more around what they can actually do with the device, the car. I'm referring to the car as a device, and whether it allows them to act without friction on whatever they intend to do, entertainment, productivity, connect with other people, so on and so forth. And so really people are increasingly, and there's a lot of surveys and data around this, is that they pick the product based on how well it works as a device. And that's really ultimately what that means, is that software plays a very important role here. And the lesson for our company, and this is a big change journey that we're on, is that you need to move according to the rules of software. And that's entirely different than the rules of industrial companies that have a channel to the consumer. And that actually requires just as much as knowing what the future product is or what that big vision is. It requires a massive amount of organizational change so you can get the agility.
Greg?
Yeah, so I'll have the consumer here as the patient.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think William Mayo said the patient's best interest is the only interest that matters. And I'll say that as a physician. And patients want their digital experience that they have in life to be reflected in their health and their healthcare experience. And I think we said healthcare has been a laggard in that area for sure. If we do things, and it's just not a technology solution, so it's technology assisting in behavior change. So the key to improved health, improved healthcare is really behavior change for patients. So to the extent that we can use technology to help with that behavior change, patients win. So let's just think about medication compliance that was mentioned, right? So that's a win for everybody involved. So patients win. They get better. Physicians win. Their patients get better. Hospital systems win. Patients don't spend so much time in the hospital and human resources. Payers win. Lower chronic medical bills. And so this is an area that brings together Internet of Things, brings together pharma in this area that if we can, even in that one area, this massive opportunity, everyone's incentives are aligned.
Joe?
I would add to that and just say that the patient is becoming increasingly demanding. There's information everywhere. They're taking health in their own hands. They're expecting to be interacted upon or with in a digital way, and I think they're driving a lot of this activity.
And Mike, we'll finish with you.
Yeah, I mean, without doubt, the consumer needs to, financial stress creates change, whether it's financial stress in a company or with a consumer, and the consumer does not have enough awareness of what things cost. We all spend our time out there like switching out our LED light bulbs and yelling at our kids to turn off the lights, and maybe we save like $100 a month, I don't know, maybe not that much. My son goes into the hospital a little while ago. He's got some kind of pain, doesn't know what it's from, goes in the hospital, $8,000. They send him out, we don't think anything's wrong with you, take some Advil. You didn't even get any revenue out of this. No revenue. $8,000. The question is, so the consumer just doesn't know how much things cost in most cases. And the data is getting better, but it's not like you're shopping on Amazon, all that kind of stuff. So we bust our ass to turn off a light switch, but $8,000, $4,000, $6,000, $10,000, whatever. So I actually think there needs to be real transparency of price and then all of our cost, and then all of a sudden you're going to see some real change.
And that will indeed. I want to thank my incredible panelists, Mike McNamara, Joe Jimenez, Greg Moore, and Atif Rafiq. Thank you all. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.